Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Van Bever, and this is Beebs Reads. Today I'll be reading The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Today I'll be reading chapter 11 out of the 73 chapters of The Count of Monte Cristo. First, I ask that before I read chapter 11 of The Count of Monte Cristo, that you like and subscribe to Beebs Reads. And if you have already, thank you. And I hope that you stay caught up to the Count of Monte Cristo audios that I make. And with that being said, we'll get started with chapter 11. When Dante entered Faria's cell the next morning, he found him sitting calmly with a piece of paper in his left hand, the only hand which he could now use. He showed Dante the paper without a word. "What's that? Look at it closely," said the priest, smiling. "I'm looking at it closely as I can, and I see nothing except a half-burned piece of paper with Gothic letters written on it, some sort of strange ink." "This piece of paper, my friend," said Faria, "is my treasure, half of which belongs to you from this day on." Dante broke out into a cold sweat, and all the time he had known Faria, he had avoided speaking of this famous treasure which caused him to be considered mad by everyone else in the prison. Faria smiled and said, "I know what you're thinking from the way you shudder. But don't worry, I'm not mad. This treasure really exists, and if fate allows me to possess it, you will possess it too. No one has ever been willing to listen to me because they all thought I was mad. But you know I'm not. So listen to me and then decide whether or not to believe me." "My friend," said Dante, "your attack has tired you. Wouldn't you like a little rest now? I'll listen to your story tomorrow, but today, all I want to do is take care of you. Besides," he added, smiling, "treasure isn't a very pressing matter for us right now, is it?" "Very pressing," exclaimed the old man. "How do we know I won't be seized with the third attack tomorrow? I see you don't believe me. Since you need proof, read this paper, which I've never shown to anyone else." "Tomorrow, my friend," said Dante, reluctant to encourage the old man's madness. "We'll wait tomorrow to talk about it. But read this paper now." "Quiet!" exclaimed Dante. "Footsteps. Someone's coming. I must leave. Goodbye." Then, happy to escape listening to a story which would only have convinced him more firmly of his friend's derangement, he slipped into the underground passage with the speed and agility of a serpent. He remained in his own cell the rest of the day, trying in this way to postpone the terrible moment when he would be forced to admit to himself that Faria was mad. But after the jailer's visit, Faria, seeing that Dante had still not returned, tried to come to him instead. Dante shuddered as he heard the old man's painfully dragging himself through the passage with his paralyzed arm and leg. He had to help him, for he would never have been able to crawl up through the narrow opening alone. "Here I am, obstinately and mercilessly pursuing you," said Faria with a benevolent smile. "You thought you could escape me from my generosity, but you can't. Listen to me." Dante realized that he had no choice. He invited Faria to sit down on his bed, then placed himself before him on the stool. "As you know," began Faria, "I was once the secretary and close friend of Cardinal Spada, the last prince of that name. It is to the worthy lord that I owe all the happiness I have known in this world. He was not rich, although the wealth of his family was proverbial. I have often heard the expression, 'rich as a Spada.' His palace was my paradise. I educated his nephews, who eventually died, and when he was alone in the world, I tried to repay him for all he had done for me by absolute devotion to every wish. The Cardinal house soon held no secrets from me. I often saw him carefully examining old books and eagerly searching through dusty family manuscripts. One day I protested to him about the whole nights he spent occupied with this useless work and the exhaustion and dejection which always followed them. He smiled bitterly and opened a book on the history of the city of Rome. There, in the 20th chapter of the life of Pope Alexander VI, I saw the following lines, which I have never forgotten. The great wars of Romagna were ended. After finishing his conquest, Caesar Borgia needed enough money to buy all of Italy. The Pope also needed money to rid himself of Louis VII of France, who was still formidable despite his recent reverses. It was therefore necessary to make some profitable speculation, which was becoming more and more difficult in the exhausted and impoverished Italy of those days. His Holiness had an idea. He decided to create 2 new cardinals by choosing 2 of the greatest and richest men in Rome. He could make the undertaking extremely profitable. First, he could sell the positions and titles, which these 2 cardinals already held. Second, he could count on the 2 new cardinals to pay him a high price for the honor he would bestow on them. There was a third part to the speculation, which will appear later. The Pope and Caesar Borgia found the future cardinals and Giovanni Rospigliosi, who also held 4 of the highest offices in the Holy See, and Caesar Sparta, who one of the richest and noblest men in Rome. Caesar Borgia soon found purchasers for the offices they were about to leave vacant. The result was that Rospigliosi and Spada paid to become cardinals, while 8 other men paid to become what these 2 had been before. 800,000 crowns passed into the coffers of the speculators. Let us now consider the third part of the speculation. When the Pope had made Rospigliosi and Spada into cardinals and was sure that they had gathered their fortunes together in order to pay their very real debt of gratitude and establish themselves in Rome, he and Caesar Borgia invited them to dinner. This gave rise to a dispute between the Holy Father and his son. Caesar was of the opinion that they ought to use one of the devices which were always at the disposal of his intimate friends. First, there was a famous key with which certain persons were asked to open a certain cupboard. This key had a small iron point due to the negligence of its maker. The lock of the cupboard was difficult to open, and when the person put pressure on the key, he would prick himself with the point and die the next day. Then there was the ring of the lion's head, which Caesar put on his finger when he shook hands with certain persons. The lion bit into the skin of the chosen hand, and the bite was fatal within 24 hours. Caesar therefore proposed to his father either that he send the 2 cardinals to open the cupboard, or that he give them each a cordial handshake. But Alexander VI replied, "Let's not begrudge these worthy cardinals the cost of a dinner. Something tells me that we'll get our money back. Besides, you're forgetting that indigestion makes itself felt immediately, while the results of a prick or a bite don't occur until a day or 2 later." Caesar gave in to this reasoning, and the 2 cardinals were invited to dinner. The table was prepared in a vineyard which the Pope owned near San Pietro in Vincoli, a charming residence of which the cardinals had often heard. Rospigliosi, still overwhelmed by his new office, prepared his stomach and most pleasing smile. Spada, a prudent man who loved no one but his young nephew, a young captain with a promising career, took pen and paper and made out his will. Next, he sent word to his nephew to wait for him near the vineyard, but his passenger was unable to find the young man. But his pastor was unable to find the young man. Spada was acquainted with these papal invitations. Since Christianity had brought its civilizing influence to Rome, it was no longer a centurion sent by some tyrant to tell you, "Caesar wishes you to die." Rather, it was a legate with a smile on his lips sent by the Pope to tell you, "His Holiness wishes you to dine with him." The Pope was waiting for Spada when he arrived at the vineyard. The first face which struck his eyes was that of his nephew, who was the object of much friendly attention from Caesar Borgia. Sparta turned pale. Caesar shot him a glance full of irony, indicating that he had foreseen everything, that the trap had been well prepared. The dinner began. Sparta was able to only ask his nephew, "Did you receive my message?" The nephew answered that he had not and understood the meaning of the question perfectly, but it was too late, for he had just drunk a glass of excellent wine, supplied from another bottle. No, my bad. For he had just drunk a glass of excellent wine which the Pope's butler had set aside for him. Spada was liberally supplied from another bottle. An hour later, a physician declared them both dead from eating poison mushrooms. Spada died on the threshold of the vineyard. His nephew expired before his own door while making a sign which his wife did not understand. Caesar and the Pope hastened to seize Spada's will on the pretext of searching through his papers, but the will consisted of only a piece of paper on which Spada had written to these words: "To my beloved nephew, I bequeath my coffers and my books, including my gold-cornered breviary, desiring that he keep this in memory of his affectionate uncle." The heirs searched everywhere, admired the breviary, carried off the furniture, and were amazed that a man as rich as Spada should turn out to be such a worthless uncle. There was no treasure anywhere. Caesar and his father searched, rummaged, and investigated, but they found nothing. Spada had only left 2 palaces and a vineyard which remained in the family, being unworthy of the rapacity of the Pope and his son. The months and the years went by. After the death of the Pope and his son, the Spada family was generally expected to resume the princely mode of life they had enjoyed before. But this was not the case. They continued to live in a doubtful comfort, and the whole somber affair remained shrouded in mystery. The public rumor was that Caesar, shrewder than his father, had taken both fortunes away from the Pope. I say both because Cardinal Rospigliosi, having taken no precautions, was completely despoiled. "So far," said Faria, smiling, "the story doesn't seem too senseless, does it?" "Not at all," said Dante. "In fact, I find it full of interest. Please go on." I continue. The Spada family gradually accustomed themselves to the obscurity. Some of the descendants were soldiers, others were diplomats, churchmen, or bankers. Some grew rich, others lost what little fortune remained to them. "Now," said Faria, "I come to the last of the family, the Count Spada, whose secretary I was. The famous breviary had remained in the family. It was Count Spada who possessed it. It had been handed down from father to son, for the strange clause in the only will that was ever found had made it a veritable relic, which the family kept with almost superstitious veneration. I was almost sure that the treasure had profited neither the Borgias nor the Spadas, and it still remained without an owner, like those treasures in Arabian tales, which sleep in the bowels of the earth guarded by some genie. I searched everywhere, and countless times I added up the income of the expenditures of the family for the past 300 years, but all in vain. I remained ignorant, and Count Spada remained poor. When my patron died, he bequeathed me his library of 5,000 volumes, including the famous breviary, and 1,000 crowns, on condition that I have annual masses said for him and I'll write a history of his family, which I did. One day in 1807, a month before my arrest and 2 weeks after the death of Count Spada, I was reading for the 1,000th time the papers I was putting in order for the palace I had been sold to a stranger, and I was about to leave Rome and settle in Florence. Tired by my assiduous study and made drowsy by a rather heavy lunch, I let my head drop between my hands and went to sleep. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I awoke as the clock was striking 6. I raised my head and found myself in darkness. I rang for someone to bring me a light, but no one came. I took a candle and began to search for a piece of paper which I intended to light for the embers that were still flickering in the fireplace. I hesitated, however, fearing that in the darkness I might mistake some valuable document for a worthless piece of paper that I Then I remembered that in the famous breviary which was lying on the table beside me, I had seen an old piece of paper yellowed with the age, which was apparently been put there as a bookmark, and which had come down through the centuries, maintaining its place by the family's veneration. I groped for it in the darkness, found it, twisted it, and lit one end of it. But as the flames rose, I saw yellow letters appear on the paper as if by magic. I was seized with a sort of terror. I crumpled the paper in my hand, smothered the flames. Then I lit the candle directly from the embers and, with indescribable emotion, smoothed out the crumpled paper. I soon realized that the letters had been written in invisible ink, which became apparent only when placed in contact with heat. A little more than a third of the paper had been consumed by the flames. It was the same paper I showed you this morning. Read it now. When you've finished, I'll supply the missing words for you. Faria handed the paper to Dante, who this time eagerly read the following words. This 25th day of April, 1498, to dinner by His Holiness Alexander, not content with having made me pay if hat, he may wish to have my inherit, therefore reserve me for the and Bentivoglio, who were poisoned, I did Guido Spada, my sole hair that I have boo, which he has visited with me, now little island of Monte Cristo, if in God's gold money, and existence of the treasure, and lifting the 20th rock in a Saint small creek to the east, to ope these caves, the treasure is in the second one, I bequeath this entity as my sole heir, April 25th, 1948, C.A. Now, said Faria, read this. He handed Dante a second sheet of paper on which more fragments of lines were written. Dante took it and read it. Being been invited, sixth, and fearing that on my cardinal's tenets, as well as fate of Cardinals Carapara, Claire, to my nephew read in a place merely in the caves of the eerie thing I possess, in jewels that I alone know of the deed, he will find it by rate line from the means have been made in Rith corner of the treasure to my nephew Isar Spada. Now put the two fragments together and judge for yourself, said Faria. When Dante had finished reading, Dante obeyed. The two joined together and produced the following. The 25th day of April, 1498, having been invited to dinner by His Holiness Alexander VI, and fearing that not content with having made me pay for my cardinal's hat, he may wish to have my inheritance as well, and therefore reserve for me the fate of Cardinals Crapara and Bentivoglio, who were poised, I declare to my nephew Guido Spada, my sole heir, that I have buried in a place which he has visited with me, namely, in the caves of the little island of Monte Cristo, everything I possess in ingots, gold, and money and jewels, that I alone know of the existence of this treasure, that he will find it by lifting the 20th rock in a straight line from the small creek to the east. 2 openings have been made in these caves. The treasure is in the furthest corner of the second one. I bequeath the entire treasure to my nephew as my sole heir, April 25th, 1498, Caesar Spada. Well, now do you understand, Asfaria? This is the Cardinal's declaration and his real will, said Dante, still incredulous. Yes, yes! Who reconstructed it this way? I did. With the aid of an unburned half, I worked out the rest by measuring the length of the lines by that of the paper, then fathoming the meaning of the missing words by the meaning of those that I had before my eyes. And what did you do when you had solved the mystery? I left Rome immediately, taking with me the beginning of my great work of the unity of the kingdom of Italy. But the imperial police, which in those days was strongly opposed to the unification of Italy, had been watching me for a long time. My sudden departure aroused their suspicion, and I was arrested just as I was about to embark on Piombino. Now, my friend, continued Faria, looking at Dante with an almost paternal expression, you know as much about it as I do. If we should escape together, half the treasure is yours, and if I die here and you escape alone, it all belongs to you. But, asked Dante hesitantly, don't the treasure I have a more legitimate owner than you somewhere in the world? No, you can put your mind at ease on that score. The family has died out completely. Besides, the last Count Spada made me his heir. In bequeathing me the symbolic breviary, he bequeathed me everything it contained. Now, if we ever get our hands on that fortune, we can use it without remorse. Dante thought he must be dreaming. He alternated between incredulity and joy. I kept the secret from you for such a long time, went on Faria. First because I wanted to make sure of you, and then because I wanted to surprise you. That treasure belongs to you, my friend, said Dante, and I have no right to it. I'm not even related to you. You're my son, cried the old man. You're the child of my captivity. My profession condemned me to celibacy, but God sent you to me to console both the man who could not be a father and the prisoner who could not be free. Faria held out his hand to the young man, who threw his arms around his neck and wept. End of chapter 11.